Hello, today I had a request for a lotus flower mandala on a hoodie. So normally with the lotus flower I would fold it in half this way and then back and that gives me 8 points on there, but that's 16 layers of fabric. And with a hoodie, being the fabric is so thick, I don't like to do that. So what I do with the hoodie is I mark it into thirds and fold it up, and that will give me 6 points, but that gives me 4 less layers of fabric. So that makes it easier for getting the dye in there and getting it saturated. So what I've done so far here is I started out with the hoodie. I have pre-soaked it in soda ash, spun it out, and then I hung it to dry. So this here is nice and bone dry. And then I've centered out just the front of the hoodie, so I just pulled the front forward, and the only thing I've done here as far as centering it is gone with the neckline here and then with the pocket, because that's the two things on the front of the hoodie you're going to center up on. And then from there I've marked out, drawn this into thirds, so I've marked out with my little protractor here at 60 and 120, and those will be the lines then that I'm going to use to fold on. So I say let's go ahead and get started. We'll zoom back out here. So what I do to start with is fold first up right up to the line there, making sure that I'm keeping my center point down here, and then I'm going to grab that and fold it under. So I try to get a hold of that whole fold there, try to keep that straight, fold that line under, and then kind of smooth things out, make sure that you're still centered up, that you still have your center point here, and you got your line that you drew showing right along that edge, just to make sure that that's nice and straight and that these two edges are lined up. Next thing I'll do is fold this over, and then I just line that line right up with the other line that I drew here. And like I said, you got an awful lot of fabric there, so I got to keep flattening and smoothing that out to make sure that everything's still on point. And then we're going to fold under one more time. So usually I'll stick my hands under there and try to get this crease going so that I can grab that crease up past where I'm going to be tying at and fold that down, and then we'll fold the last line over onto the hoodie here. So on one side you're going to have 3 big thick folds, on the other side you're going to have 4 folds over here. So you just want to make sure that everything is kind of lined up nice and even. And then from there, I'm going to start, I can see my neckline here because this is where my string is. So I know this seam here is my neckline. This other seam down here is the pocket. So just to try to get as much of a lotus flower mandala on here that we can, I'm going to start drawing right from that line. So with the lotus flower, I just draw a zigzag. I have a washable marker here, and I'm going to start right up here at that point, right where that seam was of the neckline, and I'm just going to draw my zigzag lines back and forth here. And these are going to be my general guidelines of where I'm going to cinch down my sinew. Now I don't know if I'll get all of those lines in there, but that's the general idea to start with. So once again, before you actually start tying with your sinew, you want to make sure that all of your folds are still nice and straight and even here. And then what I'm going to do is start up here at this top one, and I'll usually go ahead and tie just a little slip knot to get me started. That just, I find, makes it easier. So we'll slip that on there, and then tighten it down. And you might not get the sinew to stay right up at the line there, because I started right at the seam. So there's a little bit of fabric under there. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. There's extra fabric there from the seam, so it'll be just a little bit off of the line. But once I have it lined up, then I'll pull on the sinew, and I kind of push down with my hands and kind of help the fabric form its own folds there. And once I have that tightened up pretty good, then I'll wrap it a couple times around. And let's zoom back out here. So then I will tighten that down. And sometimes you need to wrap a couple more times and give it a nice pull there. Once I have that, then I'm going to make sure all of my folds once again are still all lined up, because as you start pulling on this, they're going to want to separate. So you want to check that before you do each of the ties. And then I'm going to just take my sinew and line it right up along that next line here. If I can get my hands out of the way and show you. So here's my sinew, and then there's that line. Like I say, it's a general guideline of where I want to go. So I'm going to wrap that around a couple times. And then if you can get it down on the table, like I said, I'll push down with these fingers here to hold that as I start to pull and tighten this. And that just helps, then you can kind of help form the creases and folds where you want them at there as this slowly tightens up. And once you have it most of the way tight, I'll wrap it 2 more times, and that's where I give it a nice tug until you can kind of feel it cinch down there. And I'm straightening my folds out again, and then this time we're going to come underneath. So this time I wrapped it down underneath, and now I'm going to come under to this other spot here, and I just have it lined up right at the peak there. So I'll line that and then get my sinew, and I try to just take my finger and poke it down in the crease there. And this one here, you can either hold it or push it on the table, but you want to help it kind of form the folds as you're pulling over here. And just to make sure that it doesn't, you don't want it to fold up on itself, you want it to try to crease and wrinkle here in the middle. So that's what you're aiming for. So after I have it fairly tight, I'll put a couple more wraps on there and then give it a nice pull. And then once again, at this point, these folds really aren't wanting to stay in place. So you have to make sure you get in there and get them tucked down so that you have folds all the way down to the tip here. And then I'm going to take my sinew this time, since we're going the other direction, we're going to come up and across, just like that. And I'll usually wrap it twice, give it that gentle pull, and try to hold things in place while that starts to crease there. And then I'll wrap it 2 more times and give it a nice tug. Yeah, down at the point here, these folds aren't wanting to stay in place. So try to get them lined up again before you put your next round. And this time, since we're going the other direction, we're going to come underneath. So I start out where I last wrapped off here over the top, and then I'm going to come underneath for the next zigzag here. And I let go of that, and my thing is unfolded. Okay, so now we're going to come back over the top. I'm going to take my finger and push down into this little crack right here, just to make sure your sinew stays in place. It almost feels like sometimes you need an extra hand to hold that in place, hold this here, and pull on this side. But you want to just pull until you feel that kind of crease up instead of buckle up. Once it's kind of tight, wrap it a couple more times, and give it a nice pull. And I think I can get one more wrap across the top here. And the point right now is the hardest part because all of the little folds want to come undone, so you have to refold all the little ones. And then this one we're going over the top and under. So there's my 2 folds. Pull it semi-tight, wrap it 2 more times, give it a nice tug. And then there's the front mandala. If you want to tie one on the back, I don't recommend trying to tie them at the same time in here, because like I say, that's 12 layers of hoodie fabric in there that we got to get dye on. So if you want to do the back, then you would just pull the center out here, line up the hood, and you'd just do the same thing. On this one, you would have more room for a bigger mandala because you're not dealing with the pocket. I'm not going to put one on the back. I think we'll just do a little fold up the back here. So, I guess the hood has a bit of a seam on it. So that makes it easier for lining up the back. So I can grab that, and then if you just make sure that you have the whole bottom hood all nice and flat, then that should be the center of the back right there. So the back of the hoodie lines up fairly easy. So I'm just going to do just kind of a funky wave on the back here, and then I'm just going to fold that up, and we'll tie that off too. But you can kind of do anything you want with the back, or you could even just scrunch it up with the rest of the hoodie. Sometimes it's fun to put something on the back also. Okay. Once I get that all lined up, and we'll tie that off with some sinew too, just to add a little bit of contrast to the back with the design. This will put a nice white line on there. So this one, I kind of make sure my accordion folds are fairly flat, and then I'll give that a nice pull there. Sometimes it wants to slip, and if that happens, then I just wrap it a couple more times and pull it. And make sure your folds aren't buckling up on themselves. And then give it a nice pull here. And then maybe I'll fold this in a little bit and wrap it one more time. Just out here on the front, just to add a little bit more detail in the design. Alrighty, and we'll cut that off, and then I've got a front mandala and I got a back, just kind of a loopy design. And then the other thing now is going to be folding all of this, the rest of this fabric up. What I do with hoodies is I'll just grab the sleeve and I'll just kind of work my fingers down in there and just gather up a big ring for the sleeve, where it's all kind of folded up and tucked on side of itself. And then you can kind of put that to the downside here, reach in from inside and kind of smooth that sleeve out now, and just kind of make it all gathered up where the whole sleeve is just kind of folded up inside itself. And this is just going to help when you're putting dye on, to make sure that you get dye all the way inside. If you get these sleeves folded kind of cattywampus in a big ball, then sometimes you end up with big white chunks on your sleeves. So this here is just going to help you with dye saturation. So the more time you spend flattening that out, that's all I'm really doing, is just working just with the sleeve and flattening it up basically into the shoulder seam. And then what I'll do is line the other sleeve up right on top of that and do the same thing. So I'm just going to work my way down this sleeve all the way so I can see the inner sleeve in through the hole here. So I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to try to work this whole sleeve so it lays right inside the shoulder seam. And that way, when you're dyeing this, you can open up all of these little cracks on the top part, and you'll know that this left-hand sleeve has got dye on it. When you flip it over and you put dye on there, you can do the same thing with the right-hand sleeve. They're not interlocked into each other, they're stacked on top of each other. But they're basically just wadded up inside the shoulder seams. And then from there, usually your front design and your back design are sticking out either side, and then you have your hood. And the hood, I'll usually kind of separate, sometimes they're double layered in there, so I'll separate some of that fabric just to kind of uneven it a bit. And then I scrunch it, and that sometimes will just add a little bit more texture detail in there, as sometimes the dye will get in between those layers of fabric and flow funny. And so, and then the bottom, the rest of it, I'm just going to kind of scrunch it up, and then I'm going to tie it off. You can tie it off. I use kite string or embroidery string myself to tie things up, but you could also use rubber bands just to band this together. But that's all I'm going to do, is I'm just going to gather, scrunch, and tie it off, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how I put the dyes on.